Hey gang, welcome back to the channel. My name's Nicky V. I'm a studio musician and producer here in Nashville. Most of you guys already know that because you watch the channel. And also my analytics show me that 80% of the people that watch these videos are not subscribed. So if you don't mind, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future stuff coming up. I thought today we'd talk about vibrato. And this is a big one because it's a big determination over whether somebody has feel or not, right? We're going to talk about the mechanics of it, the speed, some variations of it, different types of vibrato, how to control when you're bending, and a few musicians that come to mind or artists that come to mind when we're talking about vibrato and some of the unique identifiers of their playing. And if you guys like this teaching style after we dig into it, please check out my course, Fretboard Mechanics. Just hit that link down in the description. It takes you right to it. It's basically a system for playing effortlessly across the neck in any key, anywhere on the fretboard. So basically put your hand down and play freely. If this video does well, I might do another follow-up video on bending and sliding and some things like that too, because that's all kind of the makeup of what makes us individual musicians, right? And developing our own sound and our own feel. So let's get into it. So let's talk about the actual physical mechanics of it. So the main thing to keep in mind here is small muscle groups versus large muscle groups. If you come from like a classical background, you see some shredders play with their hand like this, like the proper technique we all hear about, right? Where your fingers are parallel to the frets. You're gonna have a hard time capturing the sound we're used to hearing on records we grew up with. And the reason for that is if you try to vibrato like this, you're using a much smaller muscle group in the tip of just that finger. The vibrato is only coming from the finger there going. But if you anchor your hand to the side a little bit, what this does is it gives us a pivot point. And that pivot point typically for most players is right in front of this knuckle right here on the side of that pointer finger. And so we're gonna rest that on the edge of the neck right here. And we're gonna grab that same D note on our G string. And we can really control that vibrato better. And because we're utilizing a larger muscle group down here through our arm. And that pivot point, what it's doing is we're using, like I said, we're using these larger muscle groups, but the pointer finger is actually pretty locked. And so it's pretty stiff right there, which usually stiff is not a word you want to use when you're talking about music. It needs to be loose and relaxed, right? That pointer finger is pretty locked right there. And I'm just using my forearm to generate the vibrato. And I'm kind of pulling this knuckle down like that. So that's what's controlling it. But I'm using my arm to do that. So my hand's going like this. This is what should be moving, which means a smaller controlled movement right here in the tip of our finger. So if I play this D note, for example, here on my G string, nice and controlled, right? And I slide up to my third. Now I'm on my ring finger, but I still have the same pivot point here anchored off my ring finger. This is just a locked system. My hand's not really doing a lot of movement within itself. It's really just being controlled by my forearm on that pivot point still. The hand's not moving a whole lot there. The middle finger and ring finger are pretty locked together. And also, make sure you're not pulling every note sharp. You see players do this a lot. Whenever they go to vibrato note, they go. And what that's doing is, say this is the center of our pitch, right? Since we can only go up in pitch because we're raising the tension of it, right? To get the vibrato, we can only go up above it and back down, but the perception of it is usually okay. So if you've already bend the string up, now your pitch center's here and you're only bending up like this, so everything is perceived really sharp. So if I play it like this is what in tune would sound like. Now, somebody that's maybe starting out with this or hasn't developed the technique right, a lot of the time, they'll grip it a little too hard and they'll pull down. And then it's too sharp, right? Because we're way above pitch center vibratoing up here versus right here. And another thing to keep in mind is we do not want a nervous vibrato, okay? And a lot of that comes from anxiety and insecurity when people are playing. You'll see somebody that's not that experienced and they'll go, they'll do this kind of thing, right? We do not want that. And the best way to get away from that is to be conscious of the speed in which you're vibratoing. It's good to have more than one speed, right? Think about like if you had a vehicle that only went from park to driving 60 miles an hour, navigating down to your favorite coffee shop would be kind of hard like that. And so we need to have different speeds of our vibrato and to help us mold into different musical context appropriately. This is where a lot of a player's maturity in their sound comes from. And people don't really talk about that or mention that a lot, but there's a few telltale signs of a beginner guitarist or an amateur or somebody like that. And one of the big ones is they're not comfortable on their instrument yet. And especially if they're playing in front of people and there's a nervousness to what they're doing, you can tell there's a degree of anxiety in their playing. And it rears its head in two places, in their bends and in the vibratos, typically. So we need to be conscious of this. And I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. So you have the ends of the spectrum, right? You have the BB King, like very stinging kind of vibrato that's fast and wide. Then you have the very subtle and slow, like classical vibrato. which we'll talk about later, that's you can hardly tell it's being vibratoed, right? So, and there's a whole palette of color in between those two. And it's nice to be able to move between each one depending on what your musical context is. So one way to do this is to literally set aside, because people think, oh, I just need to be conscious of it and I'll start doing it. It doesn't work like that. Growth in your instrument typically does not work like that because we get distracted and our minds are not good at thinking about two things at once. You need to divide and conquer. Set like a 5-minute period aside. And you're like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to literally work my vibrato for 5 minutes today. Like, do that for 2 weeks and you'll be a different player. I can promise you, you'll be a different player after 2 weeks of just 5 minutes a day. Versus, I'm going to play today, but I'm going to try to be conscious of it, because you'll keep forgetting about it and then you'll occasionally think about it, but you're not really getting that work put in. So put on a metronome and practice vibratoing different speeds. Fast, medium, slow. There's a huge difference in all three of those right there. And try to do it over different songs, put on a backing track and see if you can kind of notice the difference and have a control of it, utilizing those larger muscle groups. And another thing that is very important is to listen to really great singers, okay, and great musicians with vibrato. So like, listen to somebody like Celine Dion and like a singer of that caliber, anybody that David Foster has produced. A lot of the time, a great singer will not hit a note and immediately start vibratoing it. And guitar players are guilty of this. I would say 98% of guitar players do this. So when they play a note, they start vibratoing, right? Great singers, what they'll do is they'll wait a second. And that level of control right there is what separates out the boys from the men on this thing. So listen to great singers. Listen how they come down off a note. There's so much control there. Like, listen to something as cheesy as My Heart Will Go On, right? And listen to the way some notes she chooses, which ones to vibrato, which ones to stay just dead on pitch and not vibrato. Everything is very deliberate. And everything is a conscious decision made because there was an incredible degree of vocal production that went into a record like that. And those are the nuances that people dial into when they're creating a record. And so it's nice to be able to strive for that on our instrument as well, because we're all artists, right? If you're doing this and you want to be an artist on this and make a creative statement that means something, it's good to have all these tools at your disposal. And honestly, that consciousness, they were probably conscious of it at one point, and then you just have the freak natural gifting of people that can just do that, and they just are, have this super high degree of musicality. Like great, musicians aren't really thinking about the speed of the vibrato over time. They start out doing that, they pick up on it over time, and then eventually it just comes out subconsciously, right? They just do whatever the musical context needs, and they just naturally do it. It just happens. It just falls out of their hand. So I'm not saying like, oh, every great musician is sitting there thinking, well, I'm singing a 16th note vibrato or a triplet vibrato. They aren't thinking like that anymore. If you know who they are, they're probably not thinking like that. They might have at one point, though. But as mere mortals here trying to learn this instrument, this is the tactical way, I think, to approach it. Take that 5-minute segment and literally try to do different speeds. Do it on different strings, too. Vibrato down here. Control that down there. Wait for it, then vibrato. Play a note, let it ring, then vibrato it out. Just have command of it, right? Another great example of this is Daniil Shafran. He's a cellist, and I'll try to find some clip and post it on here. But he is the most musical soloist I've ever heard in my life. If you listen to the way he vibratos, it's very wide, but that's part of what defines him as a musician, though, and as an individual and a player and an artist. And then you have other examples of that, the B.B. King thing, for example. You have Iris DeMent, for example. She's like a folk Americana singer and has this super wide, super fast vibrato. But it uniquely identifies her. And you have Yngwie, right? And I know a lot of you guys probably love Yngwie. I love Yngwie, by the way. That dude is a monster. The mystique and all of everything around him, set that aside, the playing is phenomenal. And more is more. So his vibrato is so wide, has this like very piercing kind of thing to it. It's different than BB's, but it's so him. And it might be the scalping of his fretboard too and everything. And in a lot of musical contexts, I feel like it wouldn't work, but for some reason when he does it, it works, right? You hear that vibrato, you immediately know that it's Yngwie. But back to that cellist I mentioned earlier, Daniil. Check him out, guys. I'm telling you, because that level of musicality and feel is something we should be striving for. And I know we're just mere peasant guitar players, but shoot for the stars, right? And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum, and you have the guys that have little to no vibrato, and that's part of their sound. But when they do it, it means something. And like Brazilian singers, for example, like bossa nova singers, there's no vibrato in any of that. And so not every note needs to have vibrato. Sometimes it's just about the pureness of the note itself, the tone of the note without anything on it, the sustain of your instrument. Like, embrace that if you have it. Working as a session musician, it's kind of a balancing act of everything I mentioned earlier, right? You have what defines you as a player, plus you need to be able to chameleon into whatever musical context is appropriate for that day. For example, last Friday, I was on a session, we were doing like straight country stuff, right? So I needed to chameleon into the country thing, and then we did a rock song after that. But my own unique feel and everything is my imprint, my fingerprint is on each of those styles that day. But I still executed within parameters. And a lot of the time, that's what we're getting called for, is to execute within parameters, whether that parameter is the chart or we have this amount of time that this needs to get done. We need to be able to do that. We're getting called for the execution. But at the same time, when I'm producing as well, I call players because it's like having different colors you can paint with. And a big part of the color of an individual player is the vibrato. So that's why I'm doing this pretty deep dive rant on it, if you guys are still hanging out with me now. I know it's a lot, and I ramble about things and I get off on tangents, so I appreciate your patience here, but I hope you enjoyed this stuff. And if you are, guys, let me know in the comments what you want me to cover next. I might do a video, like I said, on bending and sliding. Let me know if you want me to do that. And okay, moving on. Here we go. Brian May, listen to Killer Queen. The solos at the end of that are like, maybe it's probably 3/4 of the way through the song. He's doing a guitar harmony part, and the vibratos are in sync with each other on the harmony part. That right there is the attention to detail I'm talking about that we need to strive for. And a big one right here is actually Ry Cooder, guys. If you want to see the most flawless guitar solo of all time, type in Ry Cooder, Dark Into the Street, Old Grey Whistle Test. It is the best feel I've ever heard on any instrument played by anybody. His attack on that is, in his touch, is so incredibly flawless. Every note has its own voice, and everything is so deliberate. And the main thing with Ry is everything he plays is so committed. And committed does not mean playing harder. It's because he's barely touching the strings, but there's still a high degree of commitment there. That's the feel, guys. When people talk about feel, that's like the best example of feel I know is that video. So go check that one out. Okay, next subject. Bending with a vibrato. So a lot of the time what happens when people bend a note up is they get really wide on the vibrato. And it's like this weird, squirrely, wet noodle kind of vibrato, right? We don't want that. That ain't gonna work. So once you get it up to pitch, right? You get that D note right there. I'm bending C up to D. What happens is I'm gripping that neck pretty good to get that up there because I'm fighting the tension of the string. So once I get that note all the way up there, what's gonna happen is I cannot anchor. My anchor point is already, I'm tense, too tense right here already, right? And we want to keep this all as loose as we can. So a lot of that control has to come from balancing the tension of the string with the weight of the guitar. And you're controlling that through your elbow and your arm right here. Right? And that's hard to do that, right? So something to be conscious of as well. Try that. See if you can get the note bent up to pitch, hold it, and then vibrato with a controlled vibrato like you would if you're just playing that note without a bend. Let's talk about two other kinds of vibrato. I mentioned one earlier, and it's the classical vibrato. And this works better on nylon strings because it's a classical thing, right? But you can actually utilize it on guitar as well. So if we just take this D note, like we've been wearing out for the last however long this video is now, probably too long, just play it. And then slide your finger on that string between those frets. Like that. And you're going to notice a pitch fluctuation. What this is doing is if you play this D, you can actually go slightly below, just barely. You can actually kind of manipulate it like this to where you have a very controlled but very subtle. It's not wide at all. It's super, super minimal, but it's nice to have that in your arsenal, right? Sometimes you want to just barely paint with it just a little bit, and that's where it comes in. It's It's nice. So that's the classical vibrato. Some of you guys might not be familiar with. I know a lot of you guys are like, oh yeah, I already know that, man. Another one you can do is, say you're not playing a strat, you don't have the tremolo arm, right? Vibrato arm. You can actually just play a chord and move your neck back and forth. And what's cool about this is it allows you, because like I said before, when we were vibratoing, we can only go above pitch for the most part. Well, this allows you to go below a little bit as well. So you can actually get a really smooth around pitch center vibrato on a chord. And some guitars have more movement in them than others, but like an SG, for example. And it's so controlled because you're literally using, you know, your pec muscle down into your bicep and forearm and everything to control that. Right? It's nice, you know, let it ring out. Put a little shake on the end of it. You'll see some people do the circle thing like this, which is a different sound. And this is also really subtle, but it's a good way to have it, right? I don't use it a lot, but it's something that some players love and lean on, so I thought I'd mention it as well. If you guys enjoyed this stuff, like I said, please like and subscribe. Check out that course, Fretboard Mechanics, down in the description. If you want to kind of play across the neck effortlessly and be able to put your hand down anywhere and play in any key. And thank you guys so much for hanging out. If you like this stuff, let me know in the comments, and I might do another follow-up video on like bends and slides and things like that. Thank y'all.